Yeah.
But then I get hot.
Yeah.
Good morning.
I just opened the morning.
How's everybody today this week?
Fabulous.
Good.
Yeah? Good. Good. Well, let's see here. We are in the intertestamental period. That's what we're doing. We're talking about everything that happened in those 400 years before Jesus came. And we are in the thick of it, really. Last week, we were moving through this chart. Okay, if you do not have this chart with you, I have extra. Joy, do you have one?
I think I've got them all.
Okay, you have one. Good. Looks like everybody's got one. Good. We are going to wrap up that chart very quickly, and then I have a new chart for you as we motor on through. Okay, so just to catch us up, kind of where we left off. I feel like I just jump into this all the time. Does anybody have anything they want to share? I don't know.
Just jump on in.
Jump on in. Okay. Oh, yes, you do have that. Okay, good.
Yes, ma'am.
Somebody monitoring that just in case. I did notice last week Joy commented, but by the time I saw it, it was already too late, and I'm sorry.
And I listened while I was at the track meet last week. It was so windy. And so I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to go back and rewatch it. And of course, I totally forgot to do that. So I might have some questions.
Yeah.
Well, I hear you, but I could kind of, it was a mess.
Yeah.
I'll try to answer if
Okay.
I can, but there's no guarantee of that.
I didn't know I could do that.
Last week's gone.
Or else I would have done that. Like I would have asked my question.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I try to have somebody in here looking at that to alert me.
I have no idea.
Yeah, you're good.
I'm actually
Okay.
really old when it comes to this stuff. Like I didn't even know I could do that.
I'm way older. And I'm even older
Yeah. So, okay, go ahead.
You're good. You're good. Okay. So last week we actually left off talking about Antiochus IV. Antiochus Epiphanes. He was the real, remember him? He was not a good guy.
Yeah.
He really ended up being humiliated by Rome when he was trying to take Egypt. And so he was not happy. He went back to Palestine and took out his wrath on the Jews in order to feel like he was in control of something.
Mm-hmm.
And so he began to force Hellenism on the Jews in every possible way, burning the law of Moses, forbidding anybody to be circumcised, to observe the feasts, to worship God there at the temple, to offer sacrifices there. He replaced the altar of God to the altar of Zeus. Remember that? The abomination of desolation is what Daniel called it. Anyway, and so that's what he was doing. And then we introduced a new family. The Maccabees is what they've come to be known as. Not because that was their last name, but because Matthias was the father of these 5 sons. And it was the appointed time to sacrifice to the Greek gods. And Antiochus Epiphanes sent his delegates over to where he lived in Modine, and he refused to do it. And then another Jew came up and was going to do it on his behalf in order to appease the king's delegates. But Matthias, what did he do? You remember? He ended up killing the king's delegates and the Jew who was trying to do it on his behalf. So then he called to arms everybody who wanted to revolt and join him. So that's how that happened. And so that began what's called in history the Maccabean revolt. Okay, and several Jews joined him, and this lasted a really long time. And so Mattathias, though, he did not live for very long after this, like a year. He didn't get to see the fruition of his handiwork, from the beginning. But his sons carried out carried on the revolt throughout their years. And so we talked about, let's see, Judas. You don't have that chart yet, but we talked about Judas. He was the next son who took up his father's mantle there, and he was very successful in taking back the temple. We talked about, didn't we talk about the Feast of Lights, Hanukkah. Okay, feast. Yeah, okay. And how he was able to secure that the temple back, the altar back, everything, and it incorporated, worship back to God and everything was back in order, at least as far as that went. And that happened apparently on December 25th, 3 years exactly to the day that Antiochus, did it. And then, he was able to return order. But anyway, okay. Now, Judas was eventually killed in battle in 160. And so we're going to pick up with the successors of Antiochus IV and Judas. So Judas dies. And just to remind you, if you're kind of wondering where did the word Maccabees come from, because their last name wasn't even that, they had no affiliation with that. But Judas became known as Judas the Hammer, which apparently in, I guess, Hebrew is Maccabee. I don't know. And so they all became known as the Maccabees, and it became known as the Maccabean revolt. Okay. So let's pick up on our Seleucids and Ptolemies chart with Antiochus IV. Now, he eventually dies in 164. And we're going to pick up with Judas the Hammer. We're going to pick up with who followed after him. Okay. But before we do that, I want to just kind of finish out this chart here so I can hand you a new one. Okay, now, and the other thing I want to say is the Seleucids continued on after this, but for our purposes, it's not really important. So I did not want to add them on here. It was just would have been extra, and you can go Google it if you want to know who reigned after this. But these people are important for our purposes in this class because these people pertain to the Jews. Okay. So after Antiochus IV died, and so now there's going to be some drama because you see there's a dotted line that says cousin on it. Okay, and this Demetrius I Soter, he's going to step in. Okay, because he's only, Antiochus V's only 9. He can't do anything. And so Demetrius says, well, I can do something with this. So he's going to step in. Let's see. There's so much information. Okay, so Antiochus IV had a commander of his army named Lysias, Lysias. And they were very involved in trying to maintain Jerusalem or whatever. And Lysias was really trying to, I guess, help the new king who was only 9. And, as you can see here on the chart, the 9-year-old only reigned for a couple of years. He wasn't in there for very long because, meanwhile, while this was happening for this couple of years, Demetrius I, who was the cousin of Antiochus IV, he goes on and kills Lysias, okay, and Antiochus V. So he kills the child, the king, and the commander who was helping him. And then he assumes the throne, okay? And he continues there for a little while, fighting with Judas until Judas was finally killed in 160. So we see Demetrius I, he reigned quite a while, from at least a few years, from 162 to 150. And in that time period at 160, Judas the Maccabee was killed. Okay. Now here is where I want to introduce my new chart. Let me make sure I have my copy and then I can have these. Okay, yes. So if you'll take one of these. Just a disclaimer with this new chart. It's in the works. So this, in other words, I made this, but was of course using the historical references that I have. And so in my first draft, I actually found a mistake. So then I, corrected that and then printed a new one. Oh, okay. I didn't know if he was going to say something. Okay. And so if we come upon another mistake, or you're studying this later and you're like, okay, well, this isn't exactly right here or whatever, let me know, because I want to know, because, we're all a work in progress. We're all learning here.
These are so good. I appreciate you doing that.
Okay. Well,
So clear.
they help me a lot
Yeah, it helps me
to be able to see it, and so I just assume they'll help somebody else too. So that's why. Okay. So Judas was killed. So let me explain this new chart. You see the title there called the Hasmonean Dynasty. We're going to talk about that name Hasmonean here in a minute. But Matthias was the revolt leader. He was the one who got all of this started. And as you can see, this is not the time that he lived. This is just how long he was involved in the revolt. Well, a year, from 167 to 166. Okay, and he had these 5 sons. 2 of them we aren't really concerned about because they just didn't make it in the history books as far as I can tell, or they're just not that important. But 3 of them are, and I've highlighted all the important ones in blue. As you can see that all of the ones in blue represent those who were in the Hasmonean dynasty. Okay, Matthias was the first one. Following him, directly underneath him, is Judas Maccabeus, Judas the Hammer. I have there that it's written there, second revolt leader. So he followed his father. And then if you'll go over to the right, there is a Jonathan. Do you see him? Mm-hmm. Okay, he was the third one who took up the reins after his brother Judas died. And then after him was Simon over on the left. So that's the order that they go in. But by the time you get to Simon, he's not really considered a revolt leader. So that's why I didn't put that there. But Jonathan is. Matthias was, Judas was, and Jonathan was. Okay, so we have first, second, and third revolt leaders here. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we're really pretty much exclusively going to be looking at this chart of this dynasty, the Maccabees, or the Hasmoneans. Let's see. So Judas was killed in battle in 160, and then Jonathan, his brother, picks up the reins while the Hellenists are still temporarily in control of Jerusalem and all that area. And so much so that you remember with Judas, he was able to get them out of the mountains and out of guerrilla warfare, and he was very strategic in all of his battles and how he was trying to defeat and regain the temple. And he was successful in that. But when he died and his brother took it up, they ended up having to retreat to the hills, and they had to go back to guerrilla warfare. But they still had varying successes even while they were doing that. It was in smaller portions, maybe not so grand, and so they were still trying to stamp out Hellenistic pockets here and there, and were pretty successful in it. And so his power did end up increasing. But during his time here of Jonathan, when Jonathan was leading the revolt, we'll go back to this chart for a second. This one, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. You see there in black at the bottom, Alexander Ballus. Okay. So this is when Alexander Ballus comes on the scene during the time of Jonathan, the Maccabee. He comes in and claims to be the son of Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Okay, so then if he's going to claim to be the son, what does he want?
The throne.
The throne. And so at this time, he's going to try to take it from Demetrius I. Okay, so he claims to be the son of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and he challenges Demetrius I. And he was able to reign briefly after Demetrius I was killed in battle in 150. So you see their dates there, Demetrius I, 162 to 150, and then Alexander Ballus from 150 to 145. So he was able to reign for a very brief time. The only reason I bring this up is because he's intertwined with Jonathan. Okay? Jonathan sided with Alexander Ballus, which, I mean, you have to think about it, but that side in blue on this chart is the enemy. Well, they both are enemies of God's people. But the Ptolemies, they're kind of out of the picture now because the Seleucids are in control. And so now you have a Maccabee siding with the enemy, which is, I don't know.
Treason.
Ironic or weird. So he sides with Alexander. I even read one place where they were like close friends, Jonathan and Alexander. Whatever the case, it was a good enough relationship that Alexander promoted Jonathan to several offices. I have them listed here. I have a couple here. Oh, he was, okay. On the Hasmonean Dynasty chart, it says he was high priest, which is true. So Alexander made Jonathan high priest, a general, a governor, and even declared him as Syrian nobility, because the Seleucids, they're the Syrians. And so it was during this time of Jonathan's leadership that the Maccabees were really kind of on top here. They were on top. They were still very successful, and now they were in cahoots with the Syrians, and so that really put them on top for the time being. This never lasts. Okay. But then along comes Demetrius II. And if you look on your chart, this is the son, one of the sons of Demetrius the First. Demetrius the Second, he has 2 dates. Do you see them there? Yeah. And there's a period of about 10 years between them. So he actually reigned for 2 different time periods. And during the interim, when he wasn't reigning, he was actually being held captive during that time. And his brother, Antiochus the Seventh, was reigning. So he fills in the gap. Does everybody see that? How that makes sense? Okay.
So what was the reason for the gap?
Because Demetrius the Second ended up was taken captive.
Oh.
Yeah. And so then Antiochus, his brother, Antiochus the Seventh, reigned in the interim until Demetrius the Second was released and came back to take his throne back. All right? Now, there is one Antiochus the Sixth that's not on this chart. Because you see it kind of skips, right? Because we have Antiochus the Third, Fourth, Fifth, and then we have the Seventh. Okay. Well, it's because of this. And there was an Antiochus the Sixth, but he didn't rule because he was just a babe, a small child. But maybe I should add him. I might, just so that we have a little, just so he's referenced. I'll have to make that correction because I think it'd be helpful to put it on there. But I didn't at this time. But anyway, when I originally made it. But anyway, so this Antiochus the Sixth, he's only important because he was a child when his father died, and all this was happening with Demetrius the First and everything. But he didn't really rule because there was another general. His name is Tryphon, Tryphon, who was pulling the puppet strings, and he wanted the throne because the king, who was supposed to have it, was a baby. He was little bitty, and so Tryphon, he kind of steps in, and tries to reign, but it doesn't work out. And so he kind of fills the gap here. Well, I don't know. It's not really that important. But the only reason I'm bringing up his name is because Tryphon was afraid of Jonathan. That's what he's most noted for. And he killed him. So that's why. And so I'm going to add him because I do think that's important.
He killed Jonathan.
Yeah, he killed Jonathan and Jonathan's sons.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And I guess that was, I have the date, 143. So that was kind of during the time he was trying to rule under Antiochus the Sixth, who was just a child. This general, Diodotus Tryphon, was challenging Demetrius II, and became very fearful of Jonathan's successes, and so he killed him and his sons in 143. All right? So that now then is where we officially leave this blue and yellow chart, because we're moving on. We don't really care so much about the next Antiochuses and Demetriuses that come in the picture. But we're going to move on now to our Hasmonean dynasty blue chart, primarily now for the rest of this class. Is everything clear as mud? Okay. Okay, so now Jonathan is dead. All of his sons are dead. So now Mattathias only has 3 sons left: Eleazar, John, and Simon. But Eleazar and John, they're not important. But Simon, he takes up the mantle here. And he steps up next. He's the third and last son of Mattathias to carry the torch. And he does so from 141 to 135. Under his leadership, complete independence for the Jews was gained. Complete.
Under Simon?
Simon, yes. Judas laid a lot of good groundwork, did a lot of great things in regaining the temple, etc. Jonathan was able to keep up the momentum, but it was under Simon that it was secure. The Jews' independence from Syria, the Seleucids, was complete. Primarily because he captured, I don't know if you remember, I mentioned this last week, this citadel or fortress that the Syrians had built called the Acra, in order to monitor all of Jerusalem there, and it was a big fortress, and so he was able to secure that, and in doing that he secured independence for the Jews. Let's see. Okay, and because of all that, now from here on down, so from Simon on down to the bottom of the page, you have what is called in history considered the Hasmonean dynasty. Hasmonean is a name that comes from Hashmon, which is thought to be the great grandfather of Mattathias. Hasmonean. That's how all that came about. And so Simon, because he took the control of Jerusalem completely out of the hands of the Syrians, then he is what's the word? With him begins officially the Hasmonean dynasty. Even though they're taking the name from the great-grandfather of Mattathias, that was just considered under Mattathias, Judas, and Jonathan the Maccabbean revolt. Not necessarily a dynasty, but with Simon now, because there's complete and full control, the Jews have their complete independence back that they haven't had in quite a while. Simon then now begins this Hasmonean dynasty. So I know on the chart, and I don't know any other way to do it, maybe I can think of a better way. The title of the chart is the Hasmonean dynasty, but officially it did not begin with Mattathias, but the name came from the ancestor of Mattathias, if that makes sense. Okay. But the dynasty itself begins with Simon because it's now going to be his lineage that continues his work, his dynasty there in Jerusalem. Does that make sense? Okay. And if you'll notice on your chart, his dynasty in blue continues all the way down until from 141 BC to 37 with Herod the Great. That's who ends it. And that's why he's colored orange there, because a new dynasty begins, and that's the Herodian dynasty. Okay. and that all has to do with Rome. Rome installed Herod in place of the Hasmoneans, and so we'll eventually get to all that. But that's how we get the name Hasmonean and how all that works. That's how the chart anyway is structured. Okay, let's see. Let me see what I have in my notes about Simon. I don't know anything really we need to talk about there, other than, you know, he had a couple of sons that he, you know, that were fighting for him. One of them was successful. It's not really important. They all were eventually killed, and so all that was left with his son was his son John Hyrcanus. Yeah. Oh, I do have it on the chart. He had a couple of sons, Judas and Mattathias, who were, you know, helping their father, but they eventually were killed along with Simon. And then the son that was left, I guess, John Hyrcanus, is the one who takes up his father's reign, I guess. Let's see here. Oh, did I mention high priest here? I need to. Okay, I don't know if you remember last week we talked about how when Antiochus IV Epiphanes came in and took over the temple, he installed, you know, people were paying him to be high priest, and it became very corrupt. And they weren't even of the lineage of Levi, because, you know, that you had to be a Levite to be a high priest, or a priest at all. And, you know, so it became a very corrupt system. And Antiochus IV didn't care. He, you know, he was ruling, so he thought he could just do whatever he wanted there. He could put whoever he wanted in that position as high priest. Well, anyway, so now there is a shift here. Eventually, it got back to the Levites, you know, being in kind of that position under a fellow named Onias. But anyway, and this Simon who comes in and begins to reign as high priest shifts the dynasty from Onias' house to this Simon, is another reason. But it is important to note that he is high priest, and so from here on out, you have all of his lineage here reigning as high priest and governor and king, eventually they call themselves. And so that's also important to note. I don't think I said that, but that's what it says here. You know, Jonathan was high priest, but just because he was favored by Antiochus, no, Alexander, the other A name. Now, I just thought of something, and I didn't even think of this. And I can't remember if I even read it, so I don't even know if I know the answer. I'm asking my own question and trying to answer it in my head as we, right now. But, and maybe Clint knows, if he's listening to me, he can tell me. But anyway, I don't know even if I assumed. So I don't even know of what lineage Mattathias was. Were they Levites? That's my question. I don't know. I should have thought of that yesterday or last week when I was preparing this, but I didn't. I just thought of it now. So I don't really even know if they are Levites. I wonder if Clint's going to text me if he's listening. So John Hyrcanus. He is the next one to take up his father's mantle. 135 to 104. This is where, under his rule, what's most important about him, one of the most important things during his reign, is that the Pharisees and Sadducees officially become their own religious parties. You know how we open up the New Testament and we're introduced to these Pharisees and Sadducees, but nowhere in the Old Testament do we read about them. But they originate during this, between the Testaments period, this 400 years. Now, last week, they are already in existence. We talked about them from last week. They already were in existence. But they are now officially, pretty much, their own parties. I think, did I have one here? Where did I thought I had that. Oh, yeah. So just very, very briefly, the Pharisees were the more scholarly sect. They were very much tied to the letter of the law. Okay? And they were, do you remember me introducing last week the pious one? Maybe it was last week, the week before. The pious ones are the Hasidim. Mm-hmm. They kind of came along at the same time, or even prior to the Maccabees coming up. And while the Maccabees were very much involved in, warfare, physical warfare. The Hasidim were more like just trying to maintain holiness, piety, in the midst of all this corruption that was happening around them by the Syrians. And so they were following that route, and that's really what we see when we open up the New Testament and read about these Pharisees who were just so legalistic and, tithing every minute herb and, twisting the law even by that point. And, just that's what you see. They're trying, and they really projected themselves as more holy than anybody else, right? Okay, that's
During all that mess, they were.
that's
Yeah.
that's the vibe we get, and this is kind of where it begins to take root here. This instance during John Hyrcanus here, and then you have the Sadducees on the other hand, who were more of the elite sect of the Jews, the aristocrats, who weren't so interested in the letter of the law, but they were more aligned with Hellenism even.
Mhm.
They, because that was the cool culture, kind of, I guess you can think about it that way. And so they were more, going along with that. And so, when you open up the New Testament, they're rivals. And they're rivals right now here in this period of history that we're talking about. So they have always been rivals because
The greedy ones.
the greedy ones, they're the ones that were trying to hold on. They were holding on to Hellenism. But the Pharisees, that was anathema. So this is where all that kind of really the sects take root, originate from here. They existed, but here is where you can see a clear line of distinction between the two groups. They become official religious sects. Okay, and as far as Hyrcanus in our chart here, he aligned himself with the Sadducees. So not only, basically what we have here, not only do you have the Hasmoneans, Simon and his family, in Jerusalem, in Palestine there, trying to maintain control of the land against the Syrians and anybody else who wants to come in. Then inside of that group, you have another two groups warring, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So you can imagine how messy all of this was during this time. That's kind of the big picture is what we're seeing here. Okay, so Hyrcanus aligned himself with the Sadducees. That's one thing to note under his reign. The other thing to note under his reign is that he was very busy with trying to expand his territories. And so he was able to conquer Samaria. Everybody knows that city. Idumea, that is Edom, which is more toward the south of Jerusalem. And it's important to note, too, I guess, that for the first time in Jewish history, from what I understand here and from what I can think about, for the first time in Jewish history, when John Hyrcanus went in and conquered Edom, he then forced conversion to Judaism on those Idumeans or those Edomites. The Jews had never done that before. Going in, conquering a territory, and then forcing everybody to conform to the law of Moses. Originally, when they had the law of Moses, God told them to go in, conquer the land, and expel everybody, not convert them, right? But here you have, for the first time under John Hyrcanus, you have the Jews going in, conquering a new territory, and then forcing a conversion to Judaism, which is a little ironic. Because now you had the Jews, who were very much the oppressed for a long time, becoming the oppressors. Mm-hmm. So that is unique to John Hyrcanus. He was able to successfully keep the Syrians at bay by allying himself a little bit with Rome. So we do want to note Rome has been in the picture for a little while, but not to a huge extent. But they're coming in, right? They're coming in, and so they're still over there being part of history, but they just haven't quite taken over yet. But they're still a force to be reckoned with. And so John Hyrcanus sees that it's better for him to ally with Rome in order to keep the Jews' independence in Jerusalem. And so he does that. And in doing all of that, under John Hyrcanus's rule and reign as high priest and governor of Judea, his was the last period in Jewish history where they were an independent, powerful, and united state. This was the most powerful and independent and united they were going to get right here under him. So this was kind of the apex, right? You had it starting with Mattathias, his son Judas, Jonathan, Simon, and then John Hyrcanus, and now it kind of just goes downhill from here, basically. Okay. So moving on next on our chart, under John Hyrcanus, he had 4 sons. 2 we're not concerned about, but we do need to note the other 2. The first we want to talk about is Aristobulus. Do you see his date of 104 to 103? Mm-hmm. Okay. And then the next brother is Alexander Jannaeus, but his date is from 103 to 76. Okay, very good. So, and in between them, there's a woman. Okay, her name is, I don't know how you say it. I've heard it both ways. Salome or Salome, not Salami. Salome Alexandra. Okay, now, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk about Aristobulus, high priest, king of Judea. He only reigned a year. He was the first to wear the title king. That's important to note. But he was a tyrant. He practiced Hellenism. He was all in to the Greek culture. He was also a little schizophrenic, maybe, I don't know, but he put his 3 brothers in prison, 3 of his brothers in prison, and then killed a 4th one. So he was not a good guy. And he died in 103. Historians say he didn't even die in battle. It wasn't of natural causes necessarily. A lot of historians I read said that he died out of guilt, feeling of guilt. I think he was a heavy drinker. And somebody said he might have had some kind of disease. And then fear. It was like mainly like a mental, thing that just drove him into his grave. But anyway, guilt over killing his brothers, fear of rebellion among his people. So it was a lot. But he died. He didn't reign for very long. But he was the first to wear the title, King of Judea. So then the brother who wasn't killed, Alexander Jannaeus. Oh, I forgot to say. He was married to Salome, Alexandra. See that? Mm-hmm. Okay, there she is. That's why there's 2 plus signs. Aristobulus was married to her first. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then when Aristobulus died, Alexander Jannaeus became high priest and king of Judea, and then married the widow.
Didn't they have to do that?
Maybe. I don't know. I know that that's was culturally appropriate and expected in other nations, but I don't know that was something called. Of course, this is a unique time. This isn't really, I don't know. And I guess there is some truth. I do remember in Genesis, wasn't there some talk about a brother marrying?
Right. And
it was Judah's parents, wasn't it? I don't remember. Okay, we can't go down there.
Jesus, and they said, so this dies, and then the brother marries her, and then another brother, and another brother.
Yeah, I guess that would be right.
Who will she be married to for eternity?
Good.
Tell me, got to know that mess with Shamar and
Yes, that's it.
Present.
There you go. Very good. I'm glad somebody's brains are on this morning.
Well, no.
Good. Yes, that's exactly right.
My son
Good.
thought was too young for her, and he said he'd wait till he was old enough, and he didn't, and so she tricked him, and
Yeah.
she ended up pregnant with these.
Nice work. Yes, very good.
Sorry, children.
Look at you go, Penny.
I
You
don't remember all the details.
Well, that was detail enough. That was very good. That was very good. Yeah, so I guess the answer to the question that Joy asked is yes. They were expected to. Anyway. Okay, so this happens. She's first married to Aristobulus, and then when he dies, she becomes the wife of Alexander Jannaeus. Okay, so let's talk about Alexander. He reigns for a little bit longer than his brother did. And he continues this territorial expansion, but he faced a lot of conflicts while he was doing that. A lot of conflicts at home in Jerusalem, not necessarily out there, but he faced a lot of opposition by this time there in Jerusalem, particularly by the Pharisees. John Hyrcanus sided with the Sadducees. And so I don't know who Aristobulus sided with. Doesn't really matter. He only reigned a year. And so by this time you have the Pharisees really up in arms under the reign of Alexander. And so he faced fierce opposition, particularly by the Pharisees. And this actually resulted in a pretty violent civil war that resulted in many deaths. And then here's another ironic thing that happened during Alexander's reign. The civil war happened, and the Pharisees ended up aligning themselves with Syria. Yeah, which they're the enemy.
Yeah.
But the Jewish Pharisees during this time of Alexander are going to align themselves with Syria. So now you have, which is totally ironic, again, because Syria is the enemy. Syria is where Antiochus Epiphanes came from. And totally mistreated the Jews. But now you have the Pharisees, who are the strictest sect of the Jews, aligning themselves with Syria. That's how much they didn't like the Sadducees and Alexander, I guess. And so now you can see just how twisted, I don't know, wrong.
Traitorous.
Yeah, very much so. And so it worked, though, for the Pharisees, because the Pharisees, along with Syria, were able to force Alexander to flee to the hills. So he was out. But then it dawned on the Pharisees. Then it dawned on the Pharisees that Syria now has a chance to reconquer Jerusalem, Israel.
And they helped that too.
And so, no, the Pharisees did a 180
Well, yeah.
and said, mm-mm. So they deserted Syria, aligned themselves back up with Alexander in order to keep Israel out of Syria's hands. And it worked. But Alexander wasn't entirely grateful for that 180. He was very much on the side of the Sadducees, threw a big party now that Syria was out, threw a big party with the Sadducees, and in celebration of that, he apparently crucified 800 Pharisees.
Ooh, wow.
Okay, and if that isn't enough,
Who did that?
Alexander.
Okay.
Yeah, you remember he was forced to flee to the hill? Okay, we don't have to repeat all that. But anyway,
Came back.
yep. Okay, it's a very unique period of history. Okay, so then, so Alexander's very much on the side of the Sadducees. Pharisees, he killed a bunch of them. But on his deathbed, it has been reported or recorded in history, that he supposedly instructed his wife, Salome, Alexandra, to make peace with the Pharisees and to dismiss the Sadducee advisors of Alexander's court. So it was almost like,
But did he?
a repentance on Alexander's part. for what he had done.
Mm.
But at the same time, there's this other piece of history that needs to come into focus. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, maybe. But that's what's been recorded. But at the same time, Salome Alexandra had a brother who was, wait a minute, I don't want to get it wrong. Yeah, no. Where did I write that? Oh, come on, I wrote it somewhere. Maybe I just read it. I don't see where I wrote it. Well, she had a brother who was a Pharisee.
I was about to say.
So there is that little tidbit, too, that I think is important here. Anyway, so that's how that all came about with Alexander. But he died in 76. And then guess who reigns? His wife.
Mhm.
Now, they had a couple of sons, but she takes the throne as queen now of Judea. There are not very many Jewish queens in the Bible, are there? There are two that I know of. Do you know who those? And even one is like, was she a queen? I don't even know, but maybe. She was a leader nonetheless, but one was an evil queen. Do you remember her? Nope. Athaliah came in as Athaliah was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. Okay.
That makes sense.
And so do you remember when Joash was hidden? Like they came in and killed everybody who had any right to the throne. But the nurse of Joash took him and hid him and kept him hid for 6 years. And during that time period, while the rightful king was hidden, Athaliah reigned, and she was an evil, evil queen. But anyway, so that's one. The other one is maybe Deborah. She was a prophetess, remember? She was a leader. Yeah, not necessarily. She never carried in the Bible the title of queen, but anyway, she was a leader of God's people, but she was a woman. Okay, and so now you have another one, Salome Alexandra. She becomes queen in 76 when her husband dies.
There was a Queen of Sheba.
Yeah, but not a Jewish
We
queen.
don't hear a lot about queens anywhere, though.
Yeah.
I mean, as
I mean,
much
there's-
as king.
Oh yeah, which I mean, you know why? I mean,
Well,
that's yeah, okay.
Surprised they would even listen to her at this time.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, well, she's very historical, and she
Yeah.
reigned, almost 10 years.
years.
Yeah, so it wasn't a short amount of time. But anyway, she's important here. So let's talk about her. What's unique about her is that she, of course, couldn't serve as high priest because she was a woman. And so you'll note Hyrcanus II here. He, under her, Hyrcanus II, this was her oldest son. She appointed him as high priest, and you see there from 76 to 67 during her reign, right? But then he also was high priest during 63 and 40. Again, and we'll talk about that later. But anyway, so he had two terms as high priest. One under the leadership of his mother, and then one when after he was king, but became governor. Okay, we won't get confused about all that. But anyway, that's why all those dates are in there under his name. Okay, let's see, where am I? So she installed her oldest son, Hyrcanus II, as high priest. And now under her reign, whether it was partly because her husband told her to do this on his deathbed or because her brother was a Pharisee, now under her reign you have the sect of the Pharisees flourishing during this time. They were not only just tolerated, but they were growing. They also, during this time, sought revenge on the Sadducees, as you can imagine. And so they killed during this time many, many, many Sadducees. And because of that, the Sadducees became resentful at all the power that they lost, and so they looked to her other son, Aristobulus II, to kind of be on their side. That's how we're building up to these two brothers here. So that it makes sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see. So when we can move on from her, that's primarily the big thing. During her reign, the Pharisees grew, and diminished the Sadducees to a huge extent. And so then the remaining Sadducees were looking to Aristobulus for help and favor and took to that side. Okay, now, before we get any further than that, Hyrcanus reigns. Okay. Salome Alexandra dies in 67. So then, because you had now Hyrcanus favoring the Pharisees and Aristobulus favoring the Sadducees, okay, you can only imagine. This created a pretty good civil war, right? Okay. This is what happens here. Let's see. And at one point here, do you see, because he was king from 67 to 66, that's 1 year. Okay, so this civil war was happening, and Aristobulus was able to lead a pretty good army of Sadducees against Jerusalem, and apparently Hyrcanus and the Pharisees didn't have it in them, either psychologically, mentally, emotionally, and maybe materially, to fight Aristobulus and the Sadducees, so they just fled. They just ran away, and surrendered the throne to Aristobulus. So that's why you see under Aristobulus II, he becomes king in 66. Hyrcanus only reigns as king of Judea 1 year because of that. Aristobulus comes in with the Sadducees, and Hyrcanus basically surrenders. And so now you have the reign of Aristobulus II as high priest and king from 66 to 63. Okay. Let me see what I got. Okay, we're almost done. We're gonna make it. Okay. So let's see. Where am I in my notes? We did that. Okay. So when Aristobulus II ascends to the throne as king of Judea and high priest, the two brothers eventually declare a truce. Even if it's short-lived, it was really didn't last for very long. But anyway, in the meantime, their children marry. That's the next thing you see on the chart. Hyrcanus had a daughter, Alexandra, I'm sure, named after her grandmother. And then Aristobulus had a son, Alexander, named after his grandfather. Cousins, yes. And these two marry. Okay. They do produce a son, as you'll see there, Aristobulus III. And he reigns eventually. But we're not concerned about him at the moment. Before he reigns, though, there is Aristobulus's own son, Antiochus II. Do you see him? Okay. He reigns as high priest and king of Judea briefly before Aristobulus III. Do we see that? Okay. Now, I'm not going to talk about those two. I'm just going to mention what happens here because, as you can see, the dates are very close, right? You have this, okay. We have to look, see if you can follow with me. So Aristobulus II, he's reigning, right? He takes over. He's on the side of the Sadducees from 66 to 63, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now look over at Hyrcanus II. And do you see at the bottom of him the date 63 to 40? Yeah, okay. Remember, he was king for just a little bit before he surrendered his throne to Aristobulus II. Aristobulus II held that throne for 3 years or so. And then now Hyrcanus is not king anymore, but he's considered governor. Well, that's unusual. But why is that? Because this is where you have Rome stepping into the picture. Rome is gaining control of things now. Syria has losing their control. Rome's coming in. And so now he's not going to be governor for that period. Okay. I mean, not going to be king for that period. Okay. And then that's why you pick up over here Antiochus II at the year 40. Okay. He is declared king, but that doesn't last very long. It doesn't work. He's deposed. You ever heard of Mark Antony?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's who deposed Antiochus II, who tried to make himself king. Okay, Mark Antony deposed him. And then you have the very last blue person here, Aristobulus III, only as high priest. Not even governor, not even king, just as high priest. So I did want to point that out with the flow of dates and the titles changing there. So under Aristobulus II, this is kind of where it all shifts. And this is the last thing that we'll talk about here in class. There is one man's name that I want to bring up. So we have the picture. You have these two brothers, Aristobulus on the side of the Sadducees, Hyrcanus II on the side of the Pharisees. There's a civil war happening. Their children marry, though. It's a whole, messy thing. Still messy. And meanwhile, while all this is happening, there is a man named Antipater, Antipater. He's an Idumean from Edom. Remember them down there? Mm-hmm. John Hyrcanus I tried to made them all convert over to Judaism, forced them to convert. Okay. So he is an Idumean, and he comes over to Hyrcanus II and says, hey, you have been shortchanged. You are the rightful heir to the throne. We need to go fight and get your throne back. Okay, now do you think he was just trying to be nice? Or that he had an ulterior motive? Okay, yeah. So he convinces Hyrcanus II to assemble an army, go in and attack Aristobulus II, and take his throne back. And so they did. Aristobulus caught him by surprise. He wasn't expecting it at all. He ended up shutting himself up in Jerusalem. And it was Hyrcanus and this Idumean Antipater had no problem going in there and preparing. They really weren't able to take over. They just besieged the city. And you know what that means, right? They don't let anything in. They don't let anything out. And so the people are going to starve, primarily. And so they settled in for a pretty long siege here. During this time, hence the governorship of Hyrcanus II and not so much the kingship. Okay, but this is, like I said, where Rome enters in. By this time in history, if you were to look at your map, any map, let me just grab one real quick. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but if you do have one, okay. By this, the main thing to note is, do you know where Asia Minor is? Asia Minor, when you're looking at your map. Asia Minor would be north of the Mediterranean Sea, where there is like Cilicia, Lydia, Sardis. Do you see that? That's the map I'm looking at. Do you see that on your map? Okay. Now, mine's a different color because I'm just looking at a different map than you. Yes, you have your thumb on it. You have your finger on it. Do you see that, Karen? Right here. It doesn't matter. Any map will work, but it'd be right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right here. Right here. Same land. You see it? Okay, good. So by this time in history, okay, let's just step back a minute. That's Asia Minor. That's been a big key player in all of this history that we talked about so far. And you see, as you go west, there's Greece, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then if you keep going west, you see the boot of Italy. That's Rome. Okay. Okay. So my whole point in pointing all of this out is to know that at this time in history, during this intertestamental period, Rome has already made its way all the way to Asia Minor. They've already conquered Asia Minor. So you can understand why they are very much affecting the things happening in Jerusalem, in Judea. Okay, so I do want to note that Rome hears about this squabble between the two brothers and decides to get involved. And the general named Pompey, Pompey, goes to Judea and intervenes between the two brothers, but sides with Hyrcanus II and the Pharisees. And they, together with Rome, Hyrcanus, the Pharisees, and Rome, besieged the city of Jerusalem for 3 months. And in so doing, effectually ended, pretty much, really, the Hasmonean dynasty. That's how they did it. So Pompey is that general that comes in and does that. And now Israel is moving more toward a tributary state of Rome. Now they're paying tribute to Rome. They're not independent anymore. They can't make their own treaties, laws, and rules. They are now in service to Rome. So that's how Rome snuck in there into Israel. Because of this civil war squabble between these two brothers.
Keep your squabble to yourself.
I know,
People
right?
are gonna pounce
It's
on
not
it.
fight against itself.
That's exactly right. I even have that written in my notes somewhere, like
They're just
in
gonna
the back,
pounce.
right? Yeah. And so they're crumbling, and it's never the same really after this. And so that's why you have the end here, and Herod the Great appointed by Rome to be king of Judea, not of this lineage whatsoever. Okay, we did it. Okay, thank you so much for your patience and all of that. So next time, the Lord willing, we are going to now talk more about Rome. And we're getting closer to the opening pages of the New Testament when Jesus comes into the picture. We're ending, and in other words, we're near the end of that intertestamental period. We're near the end of those 400 years. We're now down into the, well, what does it say here? The 30s, right? The 30s. We went all the way from the 400s to the 30s. So that's where we'll pick up next time. Now,
Plan on skating this week?
no, that's what I was just going to say. There is a wedding in my future, my very near future, and I'm not ready. I need to get ready for that wedding. And so I'm going to take the next 2 Tuesdays off.
Okay.
Because I need next week to prepare to leave for the wedding, and then we don't get back till the Monday after the wedding. And I will not be preparing for this class during that time. And so I need 2 weeks. So class will resume, the Lord willing, on the 31st.
Okay.
So we will skip the 17th and we will skip the 24th, but resume on the 31st. Okay? And we will resume with Rome. And I haven't decided yet how brief I want to make that class. I don't see it going into 4 classes like the Grecian period did, because that's the bulk of the intertestamental period. We're nearing the end now, so I don't think it's going to be 4. It might be 2. So that's really going to be then the end of this class. So as I always do, let's do something easier next time.
This was good though. I know it wasn't
That
easy
was
for you, but
excellent. I've never.
Well, good. I'm glad. I like I said at the beginning of this series, I did it very pretty selfishly because I needed to learn it better and wanted to learn it and get it more under my belt, kind of, and sure did.
You learn 90% of what you teach.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
true. Now, being able to retain it, well, don't ask me next year with all the details. But anyway, yeah, it's been a great, great study for me personally, but I hope it's been helpful for you. I'm glad if it has.
Yes.
But we do need to start thinking about if we do want to continue this class into the spring months before summer hits. What do we want to do? So maybe be thinking about it.
It's up to you, really.
No, it's not. I mean, I know I like the input though. I like if this is of interest, if something is of interest, maybe something a little lighter.
Yeah, it'd be good to have something kind of light to. Are you gonna
And-
take the summer off?
I don't necessarily. I haven't thought that far actually, but I know a lot of people are busy in the summer. I'm not no more busy in the summer than usual. I'm really busy in the fall.
That's really.
Once
I know it's the worst.
September
for me too.
hits, forget it.
Me
That's
too.
where I'm just so busy. But from prior to September, good. So we can go all the way to September if we wanted to. But anyway, I would like to go back to the Bible. I do want to go back into the Bible, into the scriptures, and do something from there. But I will say this in our ladies' meeting for the retreat, and we were taking ideas for what we wanted to do with it. Yvette mentioned faith.
Mhm.
And so I've been thinking about that. I mean, I know that's something that's maybe really pressing for her right now, maybe, and that's why she brought it up. But that would be a good, just very biblical, try to keep it as simple as possible, but
That would
taking
be
examples
great,
of people of faith, and primarily from Hebrews 12.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So that's as far as I've thought about it. But if you have something that you would like that is of interest to you, I want to hear it because that helps me a lot. But anyway, as far as I've gotten. Okay, I don't know who's supposed to lead a prayer today. Does anybody know? Do you want me to find the list?
I wasn't here last week.
I'll
I
put
did
in
it last
a
time.
prayer request for whoever's not praying.
Okay, what you got?
Denise has an upcoming surgery,
Okay,
April 1st,
April 1st.
major surgery.
Okay, well, we will definitely be praying for your sister. Very good. Thank you for letting us know that. Would anybody like to volunteer then? Because I don't know whose name is next. Oh, I do know. Let's see. We had Nona, Julia, Rebecca, Penny, Connie, Yvette. Did you ever do it, Penny? Are you ready? Is it okay for you to? Okay, super good.
Holy Father, thank you for this day and all these women, that the bond that we have, that we can share in your word together. Thank you especially for Veronica and the time that she spends preparing the lessons for us. And I ask you, Father, to be with each of us as we leave this place. Especially, we ask your blessings on Denise as she is about to have this big surgery. And bless those who care for her and give her healing. Forgive us of our sins and go with us on as you help us to carry what we learn and to always be grateful for your eternal plan. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you very much. Okay, done.